Hi, I'm Dr. Linda Mintle. Hey, thanks for listening to the Dr. Linda Mintle Show. Faith radio podcasts are only possible because of your support. Thanks for giving and for sharing with a friend.
Doing life together, reaching out with hope, encouraging one another, each step along the road. You and I can make everything a little better, doing life together.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Linda Mintle Show. I'm your host, Dr. Linda Mintle, the relationship doctor, and I'm here along with my co host, the other Dr. Mintle, my husband, Norm. And every weekend, we're here, we're doing life together, and we're so glad that you joined us.
Thank you, dear. I'm glad that you introduced me as your husband.
And the other Dr.
And the
Mintle.
other doctor, yeah, because you were first.
I was first.
We admit it. We know that in our family lineage of doctorates.
Yeah.
Yes.
I went first and then encouraged you to continue to go because
You did.
you had everything it took to do that PhD.
Well,
I
that
knew
was
you could do
sweet.
it.
Thank you. Hey, have you ever heard the old Jewish proverb? It says, "No one is as deaf as the man who will not listen."
Wow, I like it.
Yeah, isn't that true? It's true and cool. It means if you don't have good listening skills, your relationship's going to struggle. That's the Dr. Linda Mintle explanation of that proverb. This is such an important topic for a relationship program like ours, yet we've never done a show on it. So I thought it was about time.
I know it came up in some other show that we were talking about. We just kept talking about listening, and it was one of those ideas where we said, oh, we should
Wait,
do a show
yeah.
on that. So we're doing a show on that. Because, Norm, like you said, it's a really common problem. It's not necessarily a problem all the time. It could be an issue. I know there's a big difference in that. An issue, a problem.
I think the issue is so big in most of our culture and in organizations and churches that it is a problem.
Yeah, so it is in a lot of places that we have to communicate. So I'm not really sure what took us so long to get to this topic, but we're ready. We're ready. We got it. We're going to go.
Right.
So probably one of the most well-known truisms that comes to mind. So this isn't a quote, but this is like a truism.
We all know this one.
You know this one. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, does it still make a sound? Well, yes, it does.
Yes, it did. It made a sound. It fell.
Well, here's the science part of it.
Oh, okay.
The tree will disturb sound waves in the air, but to make a sound, it must be heard by someone.
There you go. No,
Okay.
Now we're into communication theory.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. He actually teaches on this. So
Yes,
this is a
that's-
topic
that's-
you're very familiar with.
I am. People can speak, but the question is, does anybody listen to what they're saying?
Like the tree.
That's right, like the tree. There is an awful lot of talking in our country,
boy.
in our culture, and I'm not so sure everybody's listening.
Oh my gosh. When, you think about political seasons and things like that, I don't think anybody listens to anybody in those type of situations. But when people do listen to you, you feel really understood. You feel like the person really cares about you. And it really does signal a genuine interest in the person who's talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
So can we all agree this is a really good feeling to have in any relationship?
Right.
Listening is a skill really that can make or break relationships.
So much so that there are books and books and books written on this topic because it's such a critical relationship skill.
Mm-hmm.
We looked for a good definition of listening and settled on this one by Elle Kaplan. She said, listening is, quote, giving your complete, intentional focus to what someone says rather than what their words literally mean. So what
Oh.
she's suggesting is we're looking below the surface, or what we'd call the subtext.
Yeah, and we're really engaging the whole person,
That's
right?
right.
Because we're looking at their nonverbal and all those other things. So, I know you know this term, active listening.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we hear that term, and that means to direct the focus from what's in your head to the words coming from the other person. So get out of your head and listen to what the other person is saying. By being able to do this, focusing on what that person's saying, you're going to understand their needs and the information that they're talking about so much better. Active listening is not giving advice. It's not sharing your own experiences to the point that it pulls the focus off the other person. It's not criticizing. It's not judging. It's not forcing.
Right.
So a lot of what it's not.
Right, right. So from my academic perspective, since you said I do study this and teach it, hearing is a physical act, while listening is holistic.
like that.
Basically, listening is more than just hearing the words, those sound waves like the tree made. It's understanding the context in which those words are shared, along with, as you said, other verbal, nonverbal cues, voice inflection, tone, facial expressions, and body language. All of that is part of communication.
Yeah, and as we teach that, we should really teach all those things that are involved in that. So when we're dealing with little children even, are you looking at me? Are you hearing the tone of my voice?
Right.
You know, all of that. What is that person looking like? I don't know how you do that on social media. You can't do that type of thing.
You can't.
And so that makes it, maybe that's one of the reasons why we're having
Well, and that's one of the problems with email and
Yeah.
texting, because we add emotion
Yeah,
to
we don't
what
know.
we read, and we don't know what they really intended.
And the other thing about listening is that it really allows you to be present with someone and not allow a lot of distractions to take your focus. So, you know, you and I have been in meetings or groups talking to someone and they're not paying attention because they're on their phone.
Oh, I remember one in particular. I was in a meeting with two CEOs from two different Christian organizations, different organizations. And throughout the session, one of those men, one of those leaders, was on his phone, looking down, texting, scrolling, not listening at all. As a result of that rudeness, he missed a massively important opportunity. I was so embarrassed, I can't tell you. He was so disrespectful. When someone gives you time to talk about a potential initiative and you're on the phone, really?
I know. It's just, I think it's epidemic in some ways in our culture. There was another time I remember you were so frustrated in a meeting because the other person was on his phone while you were trying to talk to him. Tell him what you did.
Yeah, so I just stopped talking.
I love that.
I was talking away and he was on his phone, and so I just
You just stopped.
went silent. And he looked up and I said, "Oh, okay, I'm happy to start again when you're available."
Gosh.
And he realized what he had done.
Yeah.
Now, he still does it.
Oh, okay. But it was maybe a little bit of a cue to try
Maybe.
to get with
It
that.
was
That
at
was
the
really
moment.
gutsy because somebody could get really upset by that. Do you think he didn't must have realized that was rude behavior if
Sure,
he continued,
he did
right?
at the moment.
At the moment. All right. So when you listen, I mean, the conversation is just so different. Just think about that interaction right there.
Sure.
It builds stronger relationships. It builds trust. So I don't know if we connect those two all the time, listening and trust, but those go hand in hand. And then it really builds collaboration with other people, which really helps with decision making, creativity, innovation. Those are not just great business skills, but you can use those in your personal relationships as well.
Sure. And another thing that's important in relationships is to feel safe. Listening helps you feel safe because you feel like you're being heard.
Yeah, and validated. And that allows you to let down your guard, right? And I'm thinking about how little, if any, listening there is in abusive relationships. I mean, the victim is really silenced and it's not safe to talk and you're not heard because the abuser isn't interested in understanding who you are. They're really interested in just controlling.
Wow, I'd never thought about that. The absence of listening can create anxiety and even fear, I would guess.
Yeah, there's a woman named Jessica Zizza. I think I'm saying her name right. I might have not said that right. But she wrote an article about the power of listening related to servant leadership. And I know that's an area that you teach. And she says that listening allows us to look within ourselves and become aware of what gets in our way to listen effectively. As we understand ourselves better, then we're in a better position to understand others and show authentic compassion and empathy.
That's very insightful. Good listeners are aware of how their listening brings about understanding and even compassion. And so they're purposeful in that. I want to hear you because I want you to feel that I understand you.
Yeah, and she goes on to say that we can't lead people if we don't listen carefully to their needs, their wants, their desires. We need to create a space where individual voices can grow, be heard, and where fear-based leadership is overcome. Listen to that, where fear-based leadership is overcome, and tune in to one another and share communication in a space of reciprocity.
Okay, I like that a lot. You know, it strikes me that one of the reasons we don't listen is because of something you call self-talk,
Yeah.
that we're already forming our argument or our next response. And so when we do that, we shut off the listening device in our head because now we're thinking and we're getting ready to respond.
Yeah, and we've both been a part of fear-based organizations, and we know how difficult it is to not be heard.
Right.
Because the leader
Right.
needs to control and be the only voice that really matters.
So over the years that we've been talking about this, studying it, and practicing it, I hear this complaint about listening. It just takes too much of my time and effort. It's easier just to tell people what to do.
Well, it is easier just to tell people what to do, right? But you don't always get compliance with that. And then people don't feel heard and they don't feel validated and they don't really want to work for you or be around you when you do that.
And they've probably not learned because you just said, just do it.
do it.
Or worse, here, I'll just do it.
Yeah. So if you just want to get something done
Right.
and you don't really care about the relationship, you can do a lot of that. But it's not going to go well in a relationship to take that approach.
Another barrier to listening, I think, is fear of change. This is interesting to me because if you're listening, you might actually change your attitude or your perspective. And if you're afraid of change, you're not going to want to listen very well. The best example of this, I think, is all the political conversations we heard back during the campaign. There doesn't seem to be much listening on either side of the aisle in Congress these days. It doesn't seem that people want to get things accomplished, and people are too busy protecting their own views and not listening to more opinions because they don't want to and they're afraid to hear something different.
Yeah, and that means they don't really want to be open to change.
That's right.
That's your point. I think another one, and I am guilty of this one, is interrupting the person before they finish. I mean, and I do it because I get impatient. I think I already know what they're going to say, or I might forget what I'm going to say. That's sometimes what it is for me. So we just don't give the person the space to be heard.
Do you remember Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? One of his 7 habits was seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Yeah, we actually did that whole book in one of the organizations that I worked in. And Covey said most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply.
That's the self-talk.
Yep. They tune out because they're busy, just what you're saying, Norm, formulating their response rather than listening to what the person is saying.
And he's speaking about a need to cultivate the skill of listening, not just in the business world, but in all of our relationships, starting at home and starting with our children, maybe. So let's get into how we do that, but right after this short break. More to come on the Dr. Linda Mintle Show.
From the moment we're born, we're in relationship. At first, we depend on others to take care of us, to meet all of our needs. Then as we grow older, we make friends, we meet school teachers, later a boss at work, and a spouse at home. Every relationship is important. Every relationship requires cultivation and nurturing. And at some point or another, every relationship has its challenges, and they revolve around conflict. Did you know that you can grow through conflict and become such a healthier you than you ever expected? Well, I want to help you look at conflict in new ways, to approach conflict in ways that work. My book, We Need to Talk, can help you become a better problem solver, learn to negotiate differences, and strengthen all relationships even when conflict seems destructive. Well, let's face it, conflict is an unavoidable part of our everyday life. But conflict doesn't have to overwhelm you or destroy your relationships.
We Need to Talk, an important book by Dr. Linda Mintle, is written to help you successfully navigate conflict. Find We Need to Talk wherever you buy books online.
Hi, I'm Dr. Linda Mintle of the Dr. Linda Mintle Show.
And I'm Dr. James Cribbs, and we co-authored a book, Living Beyond Pain.
If you're one of the 100 million people suffering from chronic pain, this is a book for you. Living Beyond Pain, in stores now.
We welcome you back to the Dr. Linda Mintle Show and remind you that you can follow her on her social media platforms, X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram, at Dr. Linda Mintle, Dr. Linda Mintle, and on our Facebook page, Dr. Linda Mintle, author and speaker. You can also listen to our podcasts on myfaithradio.com or on any of your favorite podcast platforms like iTunes or Spotify or on and on and on, down the whole list.
Anytime.
Anytime, anywhere you go.
So you don't have to wait for the show to air.
Listen in the car, listen while you jog, while you
Right.
exercise, while you're cooking. Well, that might be...
I actually have had it on when I'm cooking because I want to hear how the show sounds.
Ah, nice.
Yeah.
So just search for Dr. Linda Mintle Podcast, that, or go to myfaithradio.com. All right, so we're talking about listening. Let's get back to it. The Bible has a shocking amount to say
I know.
about listening. You know, it's interesting how prescriptive the Word of God is.
You know, I hadn't thought about that until we started to do the research on this show. And you're right. There's a lot of scripture. Now, we're not going to go over all the
No, no,
scriptures because it would take us a long time. But I think the one that's pretty known to people is in James 1. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry.
I wonder if he meant and even slower to become angry.
I know. I mean, if you just listen to those three things, they're very, very prescriptive norm. Quick
Right.
to listen. So be ready to listen, slow to speak, stop all that, formulating your responses, and then be slow to anger.
And the author of this proverb, 18:2, said, "Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions," which means they're not trying to understand by hearing or listening. They just want to talk about what they think.
So you're a fool if you delight in airing your
Yeah.
own opinions.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That could be applied to a lot of people in our culture today, right? Okay, so Proverbs 18 again, we're going to revisit it, only this time it's verse 13. To answer before listening, that is folly and shame.
Oh,
it says.
shame.
So it sounds like a good listener is the opposite of the fool, right? And a good listener is someone who shows love, care, and humility.
Well, and think about this. Don't we drown out God when we don't listen to him?
Yeah, if we're not always talking.
If we're always talking or asking, not paying attention and listening.
Yeah, we're not listening. I
Right.
said if we're always talking, if we're not always talking, but we're not sitting in silence a lot. We have a lot of trouble sitting in silence and listening for God. I love what Bonhoeffer wrote. He says, he who can no longer listen to his brother will soon be no longer listening to God either. He will be doing nothing but prattle in the presence of God too.
Wow.
This is the beginning of the death of the spiritual life. Anyone who thinks that his time is too valuable to spend keeping quiet will eventually have no time for God and his brother, but only for himself and for his own follies.
You know,
That is
there is
incredible.
so much, and we've talked about this in other programs, about the meditation on the Word of God and reading and then just pausing and letting it soak in and listening
still.
to what God is saying. Be still and know that I am God is not a suggestion from the
true.
Bible. This is powerful because becoming a good active listener takes practice and patience. Let's get into the how-tos now. Can we do that?
Yep.
When it comes to becoming a good or a better listener, our first tip to become a better listener, I think, is turn off your cell phone.
Or silence it.
At least silence.
I don't turn it off. I
There's-
do silence it.
They're just the greatest distraction of our lives.
I know.
Especially when you're trying to pay attention to someone else.
I would love to do just a study and just look at the number of times people get, I mean, the little ding when you get an incoming or the vibration or the buzz. Who does not attend to that?
I don't when I'm in a meeting.
You don't?
Nope.
I think most people just look at it instinctively. They're just constantly turning it on. So I think silencing your phone and then agreeing to not deal with it at that moment would be really good.
Because how many times have you and I been in a restaurant and watched a couple sitting across from each other, not talk to each other,
I know.
but be on their phones?
Yeah. Or maybe they're texting each other. Katie, you have a thought. Katie has a thought.
Katie wants the mic.
She's signaling us for the mic, so we're going to give her a chance to say something here.
I just want to say, my friend recently just got a flip phone, so that way he wouldn't look at his smartphone as often.
gosh.
He still has it. He leaves it in his car, but that way he doesn't look at it as often, and he has a flip phone now that he got at Target.
Oh
It's
my
so funny.
goodness. Oh, so it's like old school. Go back to the flip. We were watching old episodes of 24 and they had flip phones
phones.
in there. But that is true because you wouldn't see the screen. You wouldn't see those notifications coming across. That's kind of brilliant in a way.
Okay. What are some other good tips to be a better listener?
All right, how about asking open-ended questions? Something I teach the med students. Don't just tell people what to do. Just really ask open-ended questions. And when you do those and you ask how, what, why, not just yes or no.
Tell me more.
Yeah, this really is one of the ways you can develop a good listening
I
skills.
just taught this in our podcasting class that I teach. And when I was teaching them on interviewing, I said, the cardinal sin of all reporters and all people who interview someone is to ask yes or no answerable questions. Because typically somebody's going to say, no,
Yes or no.
yes.
Well, and you don't get to know a person when you do that. So, this is the thing. The students are trying to learn a lot, as much as they can about the patient, right? And when they're not asking open-ended questions, it doesn't take you anywhere. So they might answer a checklist, but you're really not going to know much about that person. So open-ended questions are really good in terms of trying to listen to what's going on with the person and get their perspective on things.
I like the notion of using reflection in your interactions with people. For example, repeating the words or the emotions you've just heard. If someone says, I've been feeling really exhausted, you could say, yeah, me too. Or you could say, if you're listening, it sounds like you're really exhausted. You know what this reminds me of? A long time ago, decades ago, many of our listeners may even remember, we used to teach people to say, what I hear you saying.
Yeah. Or just to repeat it. And it's funny because I teach this again as a really good communication skill to the students. And they're going, well, you're just saying what they said. And I said, yes, that's the whole point, because people really like to know that they have been heard.
Right. And they want to know you got it right.
Yes. And it's so simple, but it has this amazingly powerful effect. And so when we're practicing this, the students are going, well, I'm just repeating what they said. And I said, yeah, but watch the patient when you do it. So they're doing it and they're going, so you were having a difficult time. So you had that much bleeding or whatever the issue is that's going on. And the patients are like super engaged. They're looking at them and they're shaking their head and going, yes, yes. And when you debrief the patients afterwards, they'll say, that med student really listened to me.
Listened and cared.
And all they're doing is using reflection in that process. Now they're doing another one, which is summarizing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's another one that you can do to get things better. That's where they tie everything together, and that you begin to say, okay, you've mentioned a lot of different things, a lot of different times that you're having difficulty or feeling discouraged, and you want to change that. So you're kind of summarizing like a lot of what you heard, and then you give the person the chance to correct it or to say, yeah, that's exactly right, or you got it, or you really understood me. And again, it gives the other person that feeling that, wow,
you care.
They really heard what I said.
And that goes along with this one, clarifying, because that sometimes we're not sure what someone meant. And too often I find in conversations, people will just go, yeah. And they're not, I don't know whether they're not listening or they don't care to be involved or invested in the conversation. But when you say, I'm not sure I fully understand, do you mean that?
Or let's go
really
back
important.
and let me ask another question.
Let me make sure I understand what you mean.
Which kind of relates to checking your perceptions as well. So, are you really hearing what they say? You could say, "Here's what I'm hearing from you," and then you can say, "Does that sound right to you?" Or "Did I understand this correctly?" Right. And they can correct that perception. So it's a little related to clarifying and summarizing.
And I love this one because it's so much part of our communication teaching, and it's about nonverbal. If you're not paying attention, if you're hearing but not listening, and by listening you're engaging what you're seeing, nodding of the head, smiling, horror in the eyes, some kind of nonverbal interaction, then you're not paying attention and you're not watching carefully, and so you're not really listening.
And I won't go into this really scientific explanation of what happens when you look someone in the eye and your tone of voice is like this and you're caring. It does something to the vagus nerve. It calms people down. It makes them feel engaged, and it creates a social engagement network in the nervous system. It's wild when you look at that, but it's so powerful. And then the last one, Norm, is, not to interrupt. And I think it's just, being careful not to cut people off and to give them the full space that they need.
Right. And stop being rude.
Right. So listening is really important, and it can make all the difference in the world. And there'll be times when the most important thing you can do is listen to someone who's hurting instead of just talking at them. Lean forward, make eye contact, hear their pain. This can bring healing and comfort. So cultivate the skill of listening. It's good for your relationships. It's going to improve them, including not only your relationships with other people, but also your relationship with God.
That's for sure.
Well, that's all the time we have today. Many thanks to our producer and my co-host, Norm Mintle, who makes the show a conversation, and to our technical producer, Katie Sims-Wilson. From all of us here at Faith Radio, hey, we'll talk to you again next weekend. In the meantime, remember, we're doing life together, and it's better when you don't have to do it alone.
Doing life together.
Hey, thanks for listening to this conversation from the Dr. Linda Mintle Show. These conversations are available because of your support. Become a supporter now at myfaithradio.com. Please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes, and share it with friends so we can live life to the fullest, walk confidently, and find healing and hope.